if we eat a chili, we go red in the face, so we know that it improves circulation. And that's also very beneficial for the digestion, because when we digest food, it has to be taken by the blood to the liver and then around the body. So getting the blood into the stomach and around the intestines is a very, very useful thing as well. And then there's another effect, which is that chilies are hot. Now, if you get on the aeroplane and you fly off at the Mediterranean and you open that door and you step out and you're hit by the heat, what happens? You immediately go, you relax. And one of the effects of the heated chilies is they're very, very potent relaxants for all kinds of muscles in the body, but also muscles known as smooth muscles. And those muscles are the ones that line our intestines, so they reduce spasm in the intestines, so reduce cramping, but also in the blood vessels. They actually dilate the blood vessels, which is why when we eat chilies we go red in the face. We're dilating blood vessels. Now that has all kinds of great benefits too. One recent one where there's been quite a lot of research into is the benefit of chilies for migraines. Because we know that migraines are caused by the contraction and the relaxation of blood vessels in the brain. And when you talk to herbalists, I've spoken to Ayurvedic herbalists who talk about the use of chilies in the form of ointments and plasters on the head for migraines. And if we could get hold of whole cold pepper, a bit difficult, he died in the 17th century, but if we asked him about migraines, he'd say they're specifically caused by too much cold in the brain. So he recommended that to treat migraines we use hot things. Now we have modern research which shows that if you regularly eat chilies and you suffer from migraines, you will reduce the severity and the frequency of migraines. It can also be used as a remedy when a migraine's coming on, both internally but also externally, so we can make up our little ointment and put it on externally. In fact, I read an article a few years ago about how paramedics in California were using a chili spray for heart attack victims. So they'd spray it directly into the mouth, and that would improve the blood flow to the heart and get the heart going again. Now you may think, not so great, just had a heart attack, someone comes out and sprays chili in your mouth. You're going to get a bit upset, but actually it'll get your heart beating again. Maybe you'll get up something. So, an amazing medicine all round. Now, one of the lovely things about herbal medicine is it's very practical. And if you go to India or China or anywhere actually in the developing countries, you'll find people using all kinds of things from the kitchen, from the garden, from the fields, still as medicine. And chili is used a huge amount. So I'm going to show you how to make your own chili oil. And having made that, how to turn that into a chili ointment. And we've got some chili ointment, and on the little table there you can find some jars of it you can try out. Now, oil is a very good medium for the beneficial medicinal effects of chilies, because we know that when we cook chilies, if we stand over the pan, the oils that come off are actually the hot components, aren't they? And if you breathe around that hot pan of chilies, you start coughing. And that's because that heat is quite irritating. But certainly around the eyes, it'll bring tears to the eyes and make your eyes itch. So one of the good things is that if we make our chili oil by infusing our chilies in oil, the oils, which are the hot bits, will get absorbed into our base oil. In this case, I've used olive oil. You can also use other oils like sunflower oil or hemp seed oil. They're all equally good. Then you actually dilute the really aggressive aspect of chili in your base oil, which means it doesn't cause as much irritation. Particularly if you're then going to go on and use it regularly on a joint, you don't want to use something so strong that you cause local irritation. So it softens it a little bit. Now, an infused oil is just the same as an infused tea. If we make a cup of normal tea, it's actually an infusion. In this case, instead of doing it in water, we're doing it in oil. Now, when we make an infusion, we put our herbs, so in the case of a cup of tea, it's a teaspoon of tea leaves into your hot water, and the heat improves the rate of infusion. You could make a cup of tea just by pouring cold water on it, but it'd take about 5 hours for it to infuse. So you put on hot water, it takes about 5 minutes. So similarly, when we're making our infused oil, although we can just put chilies in oil and leave them to stand, it's rather a slow process, and you can speed that up with a bit of heat. Now when we do that, the best thing to use is a canister that's got a reasonably tight-fitting lid. Because if you heat those oils and they start to evaporate, you're going to end up with lots of chili oil again in your kitchen and none in your oil. So you want to put it in a canister that keeps those oils inside. These are really useful. You come across these in Asian shops. You get all different sizes, and they're stainless steel canisters with quite tight-fitting lids. They're not completely airtight, which is also helpful, because if you start to heat something in an airtight container, it will explode. So they do let some of the pressure out, but they keep most of the oils in. And we do that in something called a bain-marie. We all know what a bain-marie is, do we? Basically, it's water in a pan, the water's heated, and you put your container in the water. That way, you don't heat your container above the temperature of boiling water, which is 100 degrees. Now, oil boils at about 120 degrees. And if we put our chilies into oil and started boiling it, we'd end up just with roasted or deep-fried chili, which isn't really what we want. So by putting in a bain-marie, we ensure that we don't cook the chilies, but we infuse them. Now, you can use both dried chilies, so some crushed dried chilies are a perfect way of doing it, or we can use fresh chilies. So if you've got chilies growing in your garden, you can use fresh chilies. What I do is I've got a wonderful juicing machine which also macerates things, and I can just macerate them, they come out of a lovely chili pulp. If you haven't got that, if you've got a mortar and pestle, you can just do it in the mortar and pestle. If you haven't got that, just finely chop with a knife and then pound it with a rolling pin. So you get a nice chili mush, and then pop it into your container with the seeds, because the seeds are the hottest part. The general rule, and it's rather like all cooking, there are many different ways of doing it, but the general rule is you always want to cover whatever kind of chili you've got in there with an inch of oil. When I make it with the dried chilies, I've probably only got about half an inch, so this amount of crushed chilies, which is an ounce, 27 grams, I would add to that this takes about half a pint, but I wouldn't put quite half a pint, it would be about a third of a pint, so I'd have a good couple of inches of oil, because this is quite concentrated. If I was doing it with the fresh chilies, I'd probably fill it up about half with my fresh chilies and then cover it with about an inch of oil and then cook it that way. In both cases, you want to do it for about an hour. After an hour, you can test it. Just with a teaspoon, you can test the colour of it and also the taste of it. If it's nice and hot, well, you're doing okay. If you want it hotter, you can then leave it going. If you're using the dried chilies, once you've done about 4 or 5 hours, you're probably going to have got as much of the chili essence into your oil. With the fresh ones, what you might like to do, if you've got lots and lots of chilies, you'll find that you can then strain your oil off and put in more fresh chilies and do another infusion. And each time it'll get redder and hotter. And if you do that 4 or 5 times, you end up with a really nice, hot, fresh chili oil. So a good way to use that lovely harvest that you're going to get this year with all this lovely sun we've had. So once we've got our oil, we need to turn it into an ointment. Now an ointment is different to a cream, because an ointment is made up of oil and wax and nothing else, whereas a cream is made up of oil, wax and water, rather like a mayonnaise. It's an emulsion, it's emulsified oils in water. Now up to about 100 years ago, most medicines made to put onto the skin were made as ointments. And the reason for that is that up until about 100 years ago, we didn't have many good preservatives that would stop your cream going mouldy, because with water in it, it will go mouldy. You'll either get yeasts or molds growing in your cream and it'll go off. So it wouldn't have a very long shelf life, so ointments were the order of the day. And therefore, that was the way most medicines were made. There's another advantage, which is that our skins are actually quite waterproof. However, they're not particularly oil-proof. The skin is known as lipophilic, which means that it loves oil. In fact, you'll notice that your skin is naturally greasy. And the surface of the skin is made up of both fat cells, cellulose, and also some proteins. But it means that we absorb very effectively anything that's on the skin as an oil. So you can get a very, very effective absorption into a painful joint or an inflamed joint with an oil-based medicine. In fact, they say that compared to a cream base, you can get up to 40 times more saturation of those tissues through using something in an oil. That's why ointments are so good. And we know that the chili, as well as those lovely effects of increasing blood flow, we know that chilies contain compounds as one known as capsaicin, which is naturally anaesthetic. We also know that they're antiseptic, but also anti-inflammatory. So when you've got a joint that's painful, you can reduce inflammation, you can increase blood flow, and also take away some of the pain with the anaesthetic effects, all just from your chili oil. The nice thing too is you can make it from your own chilies, so that's a sustainable way of using it, and a natural way of using it, and it costs you very little. The other interesting thing about chilies and blood vessels is you'll notice that the lovely red colour we get comes from compounds known as bioflavonoids, which you've probably heard a little bit about. They're these lovely antioxidants. And those also have beneficial effects on all tissues in the body. They protect them from damage of free radicals, but also they enhance the rate of healing and regeneration. So if you've got a painful inflamed joint that's a little bit damaged and, if you like, needs a little bit of regeneration, by putting on your regular chili ointment, you'll saturate those tissues and enhance that rate of healing, as well as having an immediate, effective, pain-relieving and anti-inflammatory effect. So the important thing about any recipe is knowing the right ratio. So when you're making a sauce or you're cooking something at home, you look at the recipe and you learn what the right ratio is. Because if you put too much of this into that, what you end up with something more like this than like that, which means you're going to get a very, very hard ointment. Now that's great for lip balms, but do we really want a chili lip balm? Probably not. However, if you put too little of this in that, you end up with something rather sloppy. And that means it's difficult to apply, and when you dip your jar of ointment up, it will all just pour out. Now, in the old-fashioned imperial measures, we had a lovely way of remembering what the right ratio of wax to oil was to make an ointment. And it used to be for every pint of oil, you would use 2 ounces of wax. Now, younger people don't understand pints and ounces, but what they do understand is milligrams and mils. Now, the nice thing about the modern metric measures is you can directly transfer the liquid measure, the mils, into milligrams. And that makes that quite useful, particularly with our ointments, because it turns out that to get the right ratio, you use 10% of this to every 100% of that, which means if you're going to use 100 mils of oil, you will use 10 grams of wax. Or if you're using a litre of oil, 100 grams of wax. Now I'm going to do a little demonstration. We've got our bain-marie all set up. With our wax,